Just so we're clear, I think that Camilla Pagilla and her view on the trans issue and the transgender mania particular problem is probably one of the most cringe inducing and dumbest arguments I think I've ever run across. And the reason for that is just that it's like what she's doing is basically pointing out that historically speaking in ancient Rome, just before their collapse, that somehow how should I put this? That somehow, just before people were opening their minds about the gender roles, and there was an expansion of cultural acceptance, and men started experimenting with androgyny and weakness, and then what happened was that they got sacked by the barbarians. Well, there's a big problem with that viewpoint and trying to make it an analogy for the modern world. It doesn't work. The modern world is one in which you have an all volunteer army. You have plenty of incentive that will drive men into the military for the simple reason that there's so much poverty in our society that it's one of the easiest ways, most convenient ways to make a flight from poverty in our society. So lots of men, young men that I grew up with, ended up joining the military just because of the fact that it's a free, ride basically all the way up through, and it was life changing and helpful, to a lot of people, and it's one of the vehicles that they use to get out of the situation that they're in, and get into a much better one or much more preferred one, and that's what they did with themselves. And it strikes me that I didn't want to join the military myself, but I can't help but look at what Camilla Pagilla is putting forward and feel like there is this archetype basically of like the heroic masculine, right? But not all men need to be pursuing it in order for society to stave off, the collapse that would otherwise occur. And I look out there and I keep a track of like 10, like, okay, from my vantage point, I mean, innovation and technology won World War II. Better tech, cracking the German enigma had a lot to do with it. um Technology also is set to change the future of warfare with microwave weapon systems to disable, incoming, basically rocket fire, and to defend the ships against any projectiles that are being, or are armed forces from any kind of projectiles that are being fired at them. So we've got, directed energy weapons, which will make area denial very difficult to actually engage in warfare as well. Because you could just melt away all the incoming, all the incoming stuff they throw at you to defend their territory, and then fly right over it and then take out that system as if nothing was even there. It becomes very difficult to do that. Like the Chinese area denial will fall apart because of that. Directed energy weapons are already here. They're proliferating all up and down. Microwave weapon systems are already, a thing, and even though they've been in development for decades, that's starting to draw fruit. In the nature of warfare, it's already happening, and all that's happening while Camilla Pagilla is basically saying weak men will be the end of civilization. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that I do agree with the analytical viewpoint that there are some parallels to what's going on in America today in the fall of Rome, but it's not a perfect rhyme, or a perfect analogy. And one of the ways where it doesn't work is that unlike Rome, we have transgender people and men that are experimenting with a more broad interpretation of what it means to be masculine at the same time as you have an all volunteer military and one of the strongest militaries in the world and the strongest militaries the world has ever known. The United States military isn't weak. It just ran into some difficulties in Afghanistan, Iraq, and who knows, maybe that would have been different if they had the weapon systems that are about to come online very soon in our military. So I think the nature of warfare is fundamentally about to change. We've already seen the beginnings of this with drones, but directed energy weapons will change things even further. So it's going to become very difficult to actually neutralize a threat before it can get to you by throwing, artillery and throwing rockets and projectiles at it because it will be able to melt all the incoming fire before it actually hits the ship, and then rain hell down upon anybody that dares fuck with that device. And it's going to be this is like, woe to those who don't have the same systems that start messing with our armed forces, because they're going to be analogously basically like the people who were still fighting with metal and and swords after the invention of gunpowder. you know and you're looking at this and all this development that's taking place, and Camilla Pagilla is like, "Oh God, what about the transgenders? Oh, what God, what about them? What about them? What about them? What about them, Camilla?" It's this is just a panic. This is not somebody fighting the trans people. It's the trans panic that we're seeing from certain sectors, and I'm just like, relax. Everything's going to be just fine, and it does not fucking matter if some men take femininity onto themselves. It's not relevant. Nothing. It's not. Yes, yes, I'm aware ISIS exists, and yes, I'm aware that we've got these new terrorist threats to the United States, but we've got the men who want to fight them, and they, plenty of availability of those kinds of men. You do not need every single man in America to want to sign up for and be a hero to this nation by going through all that. Like, if some men become hedonistic and start pursuing our own desires in a rather pleasure seeking way and doing what's good for us, and screw the broader implications, like, truthfully, society will be fine, just fine, as long as we're not going out and hurting other people against their wills. Like, that's it. Like, nothing is going to happen, and that's what blows me away about Camilla being like, "Oh, look at all the androgyny, that's out there. This is a sign of civilizational collapse." No, America is nowhere near collapse. Okay, America is not in collapse; it's in decline.